Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to look at pattern matching. Just to make this clear, when we had the situation where we had an infix operator, what we were able to do was place it at the beginning in a bracket and pass it the two parameters. That worked in a very similar way to that, identical way in fact, but it allowed the operator to be treated like a function. So keep that thought in mind in what we are going to do. We are going to look at a very, very simple example of the OR, which are two vertical lines. They appear in your keyboard. It depends on what type of keyboard you have. We're going to place a bracket around them, and that will allow us to treat this using the functional notation. And then from there, we're going to look at various ways that we can define it using pattern matching. So it's always good to start with a very, very simple example. I'll take it straight out of the lecture notes. We're going to define not. Now, not is also a reserved word. And so we'll need to, when we use it, clarify something. So we're going to pass it a bool, and the result is going to be a bool, and we're going to define it in this way. Not true gives you a result of false, and not false gives you the result of true. Reasonably straightforward. Let's put it into our terminal window, or our window to evaluate it. So if we run not and we pass it true, what we find is that initially, because this is in a main file, the error I get is quite important. Prelude.not is the standard not that's imported from Prelude, i.e. the basic module. So what we need to do here is specify that it's coming out of the main file, that it's this function, not the standard Prelude. And so by prefixing it with a dot, you can suddenly see how I can use it. So that should give you some further insight in how some of this, the language and so on works. Now, what we're going to do in our next example is we're going to import the prelude operators, but we're not going to import the OR statement because we are going to create our own. So that's what that initial line does. It will hide all of the operators that are in up, which follow the phrase hiding. We explicitly import everything from Prelude except the OR statement, because what we're going to do, using the brackets, we're going to take these operator, the OR operator, and define it ourselves. So in order for this to work, we've got two parameters, a bool, and the result is a bool. And now we're going to set out the patterns of defining the results. If parameter 1, if we have this combination, true and true, the output result is true. If the pattern is true followed by second parameter is false, that will also give us true. If the first parameter is false and the second parameter is true, that will give us true, because this is a standard OR statement. If the first is false and the second is false, then we get a false. Let's test that out, put that into our, so we're going to load it up into our terminal window, and I'm going to pass it true and false. Hit enter and it evaluates to true. If I put false and false, it will evaluate to false. If I do false true, so you can see each of the combinations working themselves out, it evaluates to true. So that's a very, very simple and quite lengthy process of kind of defining. What we're able to do is actually introduce a wildcard character. Now the wildcard is simply what you call it's the shift character next to your 0. And with this wildcard, it's the underscore. Should we call it the underscore just to be clear? Let's see how we would rewrite this using a wildcard character. What we notice is that all of these three result in true. The only condition in which we get a false is this one. So let's slightly rewrite this, get rid of those three. The first pattern is that if they're all false, but essentially if that pattern doesn't exist, then we can use the wildcard, and any combination there will give us true. So let's just be clear how this is working. We've replaced all of those, I'll just draw them out, these three combinations, true, 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 false, false, true, because they all result in the same true. The only one that results in false is just that particular statement. So what I'm able to do is, using these wildcard characters, this underscore, it doesn't matter if that's true, true, false, true, false, true. It's the combination that matters here. Obviously, if it's false and false, that will evaluate that statement. Otherwise, all the other combinations will evaluate to true. Let's just test this out. Well, if you notice over here, it's been testing it. So let's just pop in false, false. It evaluates to false. So this is a pattern. Using wildcards gives us this freedom and this power to introduce patterns into how we define our function. The very last combination I'd like to look at is, so it's to this, look at this kind of, you can combine wildcards. So we can say if it's true combined with any of the others, then the result will be true. If it is false, or a P, which we'll discuss in a minute what that might mean, it will give you back P. So let's actually test this out. So if I write here true, let's see what happens. It evaluates to true, and it still seems to work. Now this last one, this one is obviously easier to read. True with any combination of false, true. This P is another way of writing essentially a wildcard by what looks like essentially a variable. We could, in theory, do this. Let's have a look at that. Let's replace the letter P and see how that works. So the first combination is true with anything. It should always give you true. A false with anything will give you the other Boolean value. Is that technically correct? Let's have a look at it. So if that's false, and that's false, and it's true, it comes to true. If it's false, it's true. Yes, it seems to be the consistent pattern that we're looking at. So a false combined with a wildcard and an or statement will give you the other term. So if I put in here false, when I'm evaluating and the second term is a false, it actually threw an exception. Didn't actually like that. Very, very interesting. Bear with me a second. So, I mean, the other version, I thought it didn't complain initially, but this would be a simpler way of putting it. True combination will give you with a wildcard true, otherwise it will be false. So that's obviously another way of writing it. And you can play with this and find different combinations of what works and what doesn't. What was interesting was, if I just repeat what I did and show you the error, if it's a wildcard with false, clearly if it's false true, it's going to evaluate to true. If it's false false, it's going to evaluate to false. So in theory, that should work. Okay, there's an exception when it comes to my particular environment in the way that I'm using the wildcards, but I would suggest you try this out in a console window.